Hello everyone, this is Dr. Brian Prostowski back for the final video in this three-part series to educate healthcare providers about vaccine hesitancy discussions. In my first video, I gave you some background information to build your own knowledge base about vaccine safety. In the second video, we talked about a scaffolding for the vaccine hesitancy discussions. And in this final video, I'm going to role model for you how I deliver talking points. And I'm going to use Elephant, who is the star of my Doc and Elephant Explain Coronavirus Vaccines series that we have on YouTube videos. And those are for public consumption, while these videos that I'm making for you now are more for provider education. So let me walk through my talking points with you. I always start with talking about Operation Warp Speed, which is the worst name you could possibly give to a public health vaccine development system that's trying to instill public trust. Elephant, you know how sometimes people refer to coronavirus as SARS-CoV-2? Yes, I do. Well, in 2003, there was SARS-CoV-1, and most people just called it SARS. Medical experts spent 20 months during SARS researching their phase 1 and phase 2 trials. And there just wasn't enough money or interest to enroll people into a phase 3 trial, and then the virus dissipated, so they just tabled the research. Fast forward to 2020, where we are now. Well, actually, we're in 2021 now, but fast forward to 2020 when the pandemic started, and the entire world was like motivated together and financially and emotionally invested in finding a way out of this pandemic to return to normalcy. And they were able to take that research that they had started in 2003 and build on the first 20 months to enroll 75,000 people, which is huge for a phase 3 trial between the two companies of Pfizer and Moderna. And the standard duration of a vaccine trial is 3 months because in the history of all of the vaccines that have been developed, usually within 3 months you can see any long-term effects as far as side effects go. Short-term side effects you would see within the first 3 days, but long-term side effects in the world of vaccine development, you can see them all within 60 days. So a 3-month vaccine development trial as a phase 3 study should be enough time to be able to say whether or not a vaccine is safe and effective. So that's in contrast to coronavirus infection, where we really have no idea what long-term effects can be. So what I'm saying is actually with 20 months of baseline research and the 3-month normal standard phase 3 trial, the science wasn't rushed. So then what was Operation Warp Speed? So the American government, instead of waiting to see if the vaccines were safe and effective before they started mass producing them, decided to mass produce them in parallel to the study to have stockpiles available in case the vaccine was at least 60% effective, like the flu shot, so that the FDA can approve immediate distribution of the vaccine as soon as they saw that the safety trials showed that the vaccine was safe and effective. That was their hope. And then they hit the jackpot because the phase 3 trials actually showed that the vaccine was 94 to 95% effective after you got your 2 doses for both companies working independently, Pfizer and Moderna. So within days of the FDA approval, the vaccine was actually ready for distribution. And within the first week, the first tier 1A healthcare providers were getting vaccinated all over the country. So Operation Warp Speed was really in reference to the stockpiling of vaccines and distribution of vaccines, but it was not actually the science that was rushed. Doc, that is so important information. I was so worried. Can you tell me what 95% efficacy means? Right. So, sorry for using big words, Elephant, but in efficacy, in this particular case for the Pfizer study, for example, there was 170 people who got coronavirus during the study, and 162 out of 170 were in the placebo group, which meant that only 8 people who got coronavirus vaccine actually ended up with coronavirus, and all of those 8 people had mild courses. So that 95% of the time, the vaccine prevented people from getting coronavirus, and only 5% of the time, you might still get a mild coronavirus despite getting the vaccine. Amazing. My second talking point that I usually bring up with patients is to make it clear that you can't get coronavirus from the vaccine. So, elephant, the vaccine is an instruction manual for an identifiable feature on the outside of coronavirus. It's called the surface glycoprotein spike, and it's kind of like a hat that only coronavirus wears. And the vaccine teaches your immune system to recognize that hat and to eliminate it along with coronavirus from your body. And since there's no coronavirus in the vaccine, it is impossible to get coronavirus from the vaccine. Oh my gosh, I feel so much better, Doc. People will also ask whether the new variants can evade the vaccine. I usually will draw the spike protein and explain, just like Dr. Gary Green explained so clearly in his grand rounds, that we develop antibodies, elephant, to several parts of the glycoprotein spike, kind of like recognizing all parts of that hat I was just mentioning. And if you think about, let's say, the binding site just being like the brim of the hat, it might change colors with different variants like UK, South Africa, and Brazil, but the vaccine is still able to identify all the other parts of the hat and still have some effect. Mutations in the context of vaccines are predictable in the evolution of a virus. And Dr. Fauci today on January 28th said that there may be a role to play for like a yearly booster vaccine, just like the flu shot, to ensure that we can actually cover all of like the different colors of the hat brims that might be in circulation to the best of our scientific abilities. That sounds like it makes sense, Doc. What about when people say they feel sick after the vaccine? Well, elephant, whenever I give a vaccine to patients, I hope they respond to it with something, like some mild symptoms like muscle aches or low-grade fever, because then at least I know it took. I always worry more if I give a vaccine that has no response, because responding to a vaccine is a sign that your immune system is developing protection against what it's intended to develop protection against. It's really different from an adverse reaction. Well, what do you mean by adverse reaction? Usually with this vaccine, what we're mostly thinking about is whether or not anybody might develop an allergy. It's really rare, and it's we're really looking for it more in people who generally carry EpiPens with them. So we watch every person for like 15 to 30 minutes after they get the vaccine just to make sure they aren't having any sort of allergic reactions. Doc, what about certain populations of people, like pregnant women? Can they get the vaccine? Well, women trying to get pregnant, women who are pregnant, and women who are breastfeeding are actually encouraged to get the vaccine because it's safer than the risks associated with getting coronavirus. This recommendation actually comes from medical experts from the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, who are governing bodies who determine evidence-based guidelines for recommendations regarding this population of women. We actually hope, on some level, that it's possible someday that mama's protection will pass on to the baby, but we're still trying to figure that out. Thanks, Doc. I always learned so much from you. Well, I hope these 3 educational videos were helpful as an introduction to vaccine hesitancy discussions, and that you can practice in advance of your visits and keep your procedure tray tools at your disposal, so to speak, organized exactly the way that you like to use them as needed. And for more information about tiers and vaccine distribution in Sonoma County, visit www.socoemergency.org/vaccine.